Well, hello there, and welcome to the story of us, from cosmic dawn to the depths of being. I'm your host, Jeff Ellison. Now, before we get into today's episode, I want to take a minute and just talk directly to you. There's no guest today, no back and forth conversation, just something that's been sitting in my crawl space lately, and I really haven't been able to shake it. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of the tough guy. And maybe it's just me, but it feels like the definition is shifting in a way that doesn't sit right. You look around right now, I mean, especially at our leadership, at the tone of conversation in our country, and there's a hell of a lot of bravado, a lot of chest beating going on out there, a lot of noise, and not much empathy. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's gone past a lack of empathy. It's just mean, cruel, divisive. And somewhere in all of that, I started asking myself a simple question. When did we start confusing being tough with being hateful? Because to me, those two things are not the same. They've never been the same. And that question led me somewhere personal. It led me right back to think about my son Brady. Because if you're going to build a prototype of what people would call a man's man, he'd check every one of the boxes. He's tough, rough, works hard, gets dirty, handles his business. But that's not the part that sticks with me. The part that sticks with me is who Brady is underneath all of that. So I did what I've been doing lately. I sat down and I started to write out my thoughts, trying to make sense of it, trying to draw a line between what toughness actually is and what it's turned out to be, and what it means for us as men to get that definition right again. So let me set the stage. This is the kind of guy that I'm talking about. There's a particular kind of man who knows how to back a trailer into a tight spot on the first try. He can fix almost anything with a roll of duct tape and a few F bombs. He has never once in his life asked for directions, and not because he wasn't lost, ladies, just because figuring it out is half the point. Well, duh. Now, we have learned to call them a man's man. You know, those rough and rugged characters who can read the weather without using an iPhone app. They show up early, they stay late, and never once mention it. These are the men who carry more than their fair share of the hard work, and they consider that, well, just a regular old Tuesday. You know this man. You may have been raised by him. Hell, you may be him. And I know one that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and that's, my son Brady Ellison. Brady's been tough his whole life, multiple knee surgeries. He's had long hospital stays as a child. The kind of stuff that sidelines most modern kids. When he was little, we played a lot of baseball. I mean, a lot. 70 plus games a year, and he was always the catcher. Fully equipped, bruised, filthy, beat up, and wiped out by the end of every game. Nobody wanted to meet Brady at the plate. Not because he talked tough, but because he showed up tough. And at home, it was no different. He was always building something. He was building tree forts and hunting blinds, pretending to be Indiana Jones with homemade torches and whips. He would fashion ninja stars and throw throw them at random things in the house. He was tearing things apart just to see how they worked and then putting them back together most of the time. And that hasn't changed. Today, Brady's a certified welder and a diesel mechanic. I'm so proud of him. He works harder than any 20 something I know. He spends long days under the hood, and then he usually has a side hustle at night to build a life with his new fiance. He does the kind of work that leaves your hands permanently stained, no matter how much you scrub them. The kind of work that smells like, what's he smell like when he comes home? Motor oil and BO. Hunting, fishing, trucks, country music, head to toe, mossy oak camouflage. Even when he was in kindergarten, all of that. he's he's that guy. But that's not what makes me proud of him. What makes me proud is that somewhere along the way, underneath all that grit, he has stayed kind. He shows up for his people. He helps his friends without being asked. Okay, now his mom is another story, but we're working on that. He's doing better. Brady's just one hell of a guy. And that's the part nobody really talks about because somewhere along the way, us guys got sold a crock of bullshit. We were told that being tough meant being hard on people, that being strong meant being closed off, that kindness made you a softie. So a lot of guys learned to hide that part of themselves, not because they don't have the capacity for it, but because they thought they weren't really supposed to. Here's how the story usually goes. Tough men are badasses. Hard men rarely bend and they never break. Men who don't crack don't feel, or at least they don't show it. And somewhere in the fine print of that arrangement, somewhere between those old John Wayne movies and the grab ass locker rooms of our adolescence, kindness got reclassified. Being kind was filed under soft, shelved right next to weak, brought out only in private if men ever bring it out at all. This story made a certain kind of sense for a certain kind of world, a world where the work was genuinely brutal, where showing your poker hand could get you shot from across the table, or where endurance was mandatory and vulnerability was a real life or death liability. But let's face it, guys, most of us aren't out there homesteading anymore. The frontier closed long ago. All the worthwhile native lands have already been quote unquote civilized, and yet we're still running the same outdated operating system. A tough guy mentality patched together from centuries of folklore about what a real man looks like. A secret recipe of just the right secret herbs and spices passed down from father to son without anyone bothering to update it since maybe the Great Depression. Now, our world has changed, and it's changed mostly for the better. But let's get one thing straight. I'm not making an argument against being tough. Toughness is real, it matters. The ability to endure discomfort, to hold steady when things are hard, to keep going when every other person has found a reason to quit. That's not a myth, that's a virtue. Today's world needs toughness. But toughness is not a personality trait, it's a tool. And like any tool in the tough guy toolbox, what matters is what you can actually build with it. A real man can be tough and still be the first one to notice when someone at the kitchen table has gone quiet. He can be battered and bruised by the world and still make the people in his life feel safe. Like my son, he can have calluses on his hands, grease on his shirt, dirt under his fingernails, and he can still be extraordinarily gentle with something that needs gentleness. A child, an animal, an apology, heck, an honest conversation that's been waiting too long. A real man can be tough and still treat people the right way. He can disagree without being disrespectful. He can hold his ground without tearing someone else down in the meantime. He can walk into any room with a bad boy presence and not need to make anyone else feel smaller to know exactly who he is. That's strength. Tough and kind were never opposites. Someone just drew the map that way for us guys, and we've been navigating by it ever since. Now, here's the thing nobody told us men, and it's something that will sound strange, but if you ponder it long enough, will start to make complete and total sense. The most difficult thing the modern Marlboro man will ever attempt, it ain't physical. Most of us guys aren't herding cattle or fighting off Viking hordes anymore. We're not sailing the seven seas by navigating the stars or cutting lumber to build our own log cabins. The most difficult thing we face isn't so laborious. Yeah, no, those things are hard, sure, but they're a known kind of hardness. Familiar territory. The kind of difficult most men have trained for since they were little boys without even realizing it. The hardest thing a modern man can do is sit with his thoughts and be honest about who he is while still maintaining the inner strength to be tough and compassionate all at the same time. And this isn't a soft skill, it is arguably the most demanding kind of repair work there is. Men can neglect their emotional interior for decades and still function. Sure, they can still get the work done, they can still show up. That bill doesn't come due all at once, it accumulates quietly in the background of our lives, the way, say, deferred maintenance on diesel engines always does. The cowboy who checks his gear before a long ride, he isn't weak. He's not worried. He's not distracted and doubtful. He simply knows that the condition of your equipment determines whether you make it home to your wife and kids. And some of the most important equipment you carry isn't on your saddle. The man who tends to it, who sits with himself honestly, who practices kindness not as a concession, but as a form of precision, who stays curious and open without ever losing his backbone, that man is doing something quietly radical. He's choosing in a world that profits from his anger and his division to be undivided. That's not a small thing. We need more of it. Kindness, it's not weakness. There's a version of kindness that I find more than a little exhausting, to be honest with you. The kind that announces itself, apologizes preemptively, and that kind of kindness that seems mostly concerned with being seen being kind. You know, the look at me kindness of our Facebook posts and Instagram feeds. That's not what I'm talking about. The kindness that belongs to a tough man looks nothing like that. It's much quieter, it's more deliberate. It doesn't make speeches, it makes decisions. It's the choice to treat the wait staff well when nobody important is watching. It's noticing that someone is struggling and saying something different, direct, instead of pretending not to see it. It's the capacity to hold firm to your ground on what matters most to you while still being genuinely curious about the person across from you, especially when they're different from you. And that last one is where a lot of men get tripped up. Not because they're bad people, because they've never been asked to practice it. Curiosity about people who live differently than you isn't a political position. It's not a concession. It doesn't require you to agree with anyone or abandon anything you believe. It just requires the same thing that any skilled tradesman will tell you separates a competent worker from a great one. Pay attention. Look at what is actually in front of you. Don't assume you already know everything about a job before you've completely examined it. That's not soft thinking, that's good thinking. Being mean doesn't make you tough. Being loud doesn't make you strong. And hate doesn't make you a man. That's insecurity dressed up in work boots. Bigotry, cruelty, tearing people down because they're different. That's not what real men do. That's fear. A man who actually knows who he is doesn't need all that. He can show up with a mouthful of Kodiak and a big ass 10-gallon hat and still be himself because he knows who he is. Not because he's declared everyone else lesser, but because he's done the work of understanding himself well enough that he doesn't need to. Man, that's the rarest kind of badass. And that's what I see in Brady. When I think about the man he's becoming, I don't think about what he can fix or how hard he can work. He can fix a lot of stuff, trust me, and he works his tail off. what I think about how people will remember him one day, how he treated them, how he carried himself, how he made things better for his friends just by being there. That's what lasts. And man, I couldn't be more proud of him. Now, gentlemen, I'm not suggesting that you have to burn your Harley jackets or shave your killer caveman beard. You don't have to change your voice or your politics or what you order when you sit down at a restaurant. You don't have to become anyone other than who you already are. You just have to be willing to ask whether who you already are is the fullest, truest version of yourself, or whether you've got more in the tank. Because men of character have always been the ones who held themselves to the highest standard they could imagine. The hardest things, the ones that actually change a life, are the ones that break a pattern. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Sit with that for a little bit. The strength, the grit, the work ethic, that all stays. But there's another layer most men were never shown how to build. The part that pauses long enough to listen deeply, the part that chooses patience over quick reaction, the part that treats people well, not because it's expected, but because it's just the right thing to do. That kind of strength doesn't come from bench pressing more or pushing harder. It comes from looking inward and deciding there's still more to grow into. Now, in my opinion, that's the kind of man worth becoming. So if you're still out there, listen closely. You can be a man's man without being an asshole. You don't have to change who you are to become a better man. Keep working hard. Go ahead, say less. Handle your business. But don't ever confuse toughness with being closed off, angry, mean, or what I've seen lately, just downright cruel. Go ahead, be a tough guy. The world needs more of that. But do us all a favor. Just don't be an asshole. You're better than that. Take a minute to think that through. And then saddle up and ride, cowboy. That's my message. Did you enjoy it? If you did, share it with a man that you deeply respect, the kind who's tough enough to think about it. And if you get the time, visit our website, www.thestoryofus.com. You can go to the Start Here tab. It's a landing page that'll give you all the basics. You can subscribe for essays like the one that I'm talking about here today. And you can listen to some of our podcasts, etc. Messages like this only work if they travel, and people like you are the people who make those messages resonate across the community. So if you feel like me, if you feel like there's room for people to be hard-nosed tough guys and leave out the cruelty and be more empathetic, then I hope you'll share this with someone else you love. Peace be with you, my friends.